Hi guys, this is Phil Hogan. He's the EU Trade Commissioner. So he's dealing with the UK at the moment regarding the transition periods trade negotiations. And he's not very positive, optimistic to say the least. So let's hear what he had to say.
I have to say that we're not making much progress at the moment. So, perhaps the United Kingdom have come to the conclusion that there's not going to be a deal. I hope not, because we want a deal. But speed is of the essence because time is short. And the next round of negotiations next week, we hope that we will see a bigger effort than we've seen to date from the United Kingdom side to move on certain issues, because we stand ready to move on ours, to move towards some of the solutions that are required as well, and many issues of concern to both sides. So we have a spirit of in the European Union side to try and do a deal, but we're not getting much traction from the United Kingdom negotiators to date. And perhaps this is more strategy than substance, but we certainly need confidence building measures in the next round of negotiations next week.
So what is the British government doing here? I think what's very important to remember is that Boris Johnson is probably on his way out. The Conservative Party are tanking in the polls at the moment. They're taking a hit because of Boris Johnson's response to the pandemic, first of all, and generally apathy towards the Conservative Party. And there is a lot of pressure being put on the MPs who have won seats in the north of England, who had taken over seats that had been held by Labour MPs for decades, even for almost a century in some cases. There's pressure on them over what's happened with Dominic Cummings. They see how the public are asked to do one thing and senior members of government are allowed to do something else. And there's a huge amount of anger towards the government at the moment because of that. Now, because Boris Johnson has refused to fire Dominic Cummings, he's getting a lot of heat, justifiably. Now, how does this play into the Brexit scenario? Well, you have to remember that David Frost, who is the chief negotiator for the UK, he's going to be there irrespective of who is Prime Minister. So if Boris Johnson is removed because of his shenanigans and his support for Dominic Cummings and how he's damaging the brand of the Conservative Party, whoever replaces him will not have any real influence over the negotiations, because you have your chief negotiator, David Frost. He's going to have a mandate. He's going to have a list of things he can do. The new Prime Minister may be able to influence him somewhat, but his decision making will be decided by the Conservative Party, not by the Prime Minister. So I think what's going to happen is, if the Conservative Party decide we want an extension, then there will be an extension. If Boris Johnson, and this would probably require Boris Johnson to be removed. So if Boris Johnson leaves and you have a new Prime Minister, it doesn't need to happen immediately. It could happen towards the end of this year. But if the Conservative Party are feeling it's necessary for Boris Johnson to go, they will clip his wings. They will decide what David Frost has to do. They will decide his remit. They will say, this is what you should negotiate, this is what you should avoid, this is what we are willing to give to the European Union. And they will decide whether it's necessary to have an extension to the transition period. This will be out of Boris Johnson's hands. And I have a feeling this is probably already starting to take place. And it's interesting because it was pretty much caused by Dominic Cummings, the guy who delivered Brexit and delivered Boris Johnson his majority. But I've talked about this before. The party will defend the party. They don't care about the Prime Minister at the time. The Prime Minister is as we say here in Italy, use and dispose. So what's going to happen is probably the party will will advise David Frost to ask for an extension. Boris Johnson will go there and rubber stamp it. Boris Johnson probably has no more control. The party is deciding now. Or if it doesn't work out that way, there will be an attempt to work out some sort of backroom deal with the EU. So they will not ask for an extension, but they will ask for a bare bones deal. So I talked about this last year, where the UK could attempt to have some sort of bare bones deal in order to save face, to come back to Parliament and say, look, we have a deal with the European Union, and now we can end the transition period and we can continue the negotiations. Something Brexiteers don't seem to understand is that when the transition period ends, that's not the end of the negotiations. The negotiations will continue for years and decades, because there will be many deals that will need to be sorted out. The transition period is in a sense, the second step. The beginning of the transition period was the first step. The second step is after the transition period. And of course, even if the UK leaves without a deal, the day after no deal, they will have to go to Brussels and work out a deal. Now, the European Union want, of course, a deal because they don't want chaos. On the 1st of January in 2021, they don't want to have to deal with the fallout of a no-deal Brexit. The UK, they said they're pretty much indifferent to what the UK wants to do within the UK. They have concerns about EU citizens, of course, but what the UK does is their business. But they don't want chaos on the border. They don't want trucks piling up in Calais or in European ports attempting to get to the UK, but unable to because of a lack of infrastructure, a lack of paperwork, a lack of preparation on the UK side. So it's going to be interesting how the next steps are taken and what we're going to see in the next number of weeks. But I think this is partly strategic on the side of the UK, but I think also partly political, in the sense that the party is deciding, not Boris Johnson anymore. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server, where we share news, chat, and have some fun. If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.